The city did not scream when it fell. It exhaled. Smoke rose slowly, as if even the fires were exhausted. Stone streets that had echoed with footsteps, laughter, and prayers now carried only the sound of Roman sandals moving in calm, measured lines. Victory had already been declared. The battle was over. The men were dead or chained. The gold was counted. And now, quietly, efficiently, the empire turned its attention to the women. 25,000 of them. Not as an accident of war. Not as chaos. But as part of a system so refined, so normalized, that Rome barely bothered to record it as cruelty. To the empire, it was administration. She stood among thousands in the open square where the market had once been. Her name no longer mattered. The Romans did not ask for names. They asked for age, strength, teeth, skin, and whether a body could endure work or birth. She was 19. Her hands still smelled faintly of bread dough from the morning before the siege. By nightfall, she was property. Rome did not invent conquest, but it perfected what came after. When a city was taken, the legions followed a sequence as strict as any military drill. First, resistance was crushed. Second, wealth was secured. Third came the sorting of human remains. Men of fighting age were usually executed or sent to mines. Boys might be trained for labor or the army. Old people were ignored, left to starve. Women, however, were never ignored. They were counted. Officials known as questors arrived not with swords but with tablets. They recorded numbers with the same care used for grain or livestock. Young women were marked with symbols chalked onto their arms or tunics. A curved line meant domestic labor. A square meant agricultural work. A small dot near the collarbone marked those considered suitable for breeding future slaves. No one explained the marks. Explanation was unnecessary. Rome called this res. A thing. The women were held temporarily in camps outside the city walls. These were not prisons in the usual sense. There were no iron bars. Escape was pointless. The surrounding land was controlled by Roman patrols, and hunger worked faster than chains. The camps were loud at first. Crying. Shouting. Prayers in dozens of languages. Within days, silence settled in. Silence was useful. Silent people were easier to move. From there, the system expanded outward like veins. Some women were sent south to estates owned by senators who had funded the campaign. Others were marched east to supply labor for new roads, aqueducts, and villas. Many were shipped across the sea, packed into the dark holds of merchant vessels that smelled of salt, mold, and fear. Rome did not see them as stolen lives. Rome saw them as resources redistributed after war. The empire justified this with law. Roman jurists argued that conquest erased prior identity. Once defeated, a people ceased to exist as a political entity. Their bodies, therefore, belonged to the victor. This idea was taught, debated, and refined in Rome's schools. It appeared clean on parchment. It sounded reasonable in Latin. It hid suffering behind grammar. One woman, older than most, understood this faster than the others. She had lived through 2 wars already. She told the younger ones not to resist during inspections. Resistance lowered value. A slap could turn into a broken jaw. A broken jaw could mean being discarded. Survival, she said, was not bravery. It was calculation. They listened. They learned to stand straight. To lower their eyes at the right moment. To appear healthy but not defiant. Rome rewarded compliance with continued existence. In the countryside, villas waited. Wealthy Romans preferred enslaved women from conquered territories for their households. They were considered exotic, obedient, and replaceable. A woman might be assigned to kitchens, laundries, weaving rooms, or nurseries. She would rise before dawn and sleep after midnight. Her body belonged not only to labor but to discipline. Mistakes were corrected immediately. Publicly. Children born from these women inherited their status automatically. Slavery reproduced itself without Rome needing to lift another sword. This was not incidental. It was policy. A conquered womb was more valuable than conquered land. Some women were sent to urban workshops. Pottery, textiles, dye houses. These places were hot, loud, and relentless. The air burned the lungs. Hands cracked and bled. Death came slowly there, disguised as exhaustion. When one body failed, another replaced it. Rome's supply never ran out. Others disappeared into places not listed on official records. Brothels operated legally throughout the empire. Many were state-regulated. The women inside them were registered, taxed, inspected. Rome did not pretend virtue. It monetized desire. For enslaved women taken after war, assignment to such places was considered efficient use. The empire did not frame this as violence. It framed it as order. In all of this, what made the system truly powerful was not cruelty alone, but normalization. Roman citizens saw enslaved women everywhere. Pouring wine. Carrying water. Sweeping floors. They became part of the background of daily life. A child growing up in Rome learned early that some people were owned. No explanation was required. Occasionally, resistance surfaced. A woman poisoned a master. Another set fire to a storehouse. Small rebellions flared and died quickly. Punishment was swift and exemplary. Rome believed terror, applied selectively, maintained peace more efficiently than constant force. And yet, within the machinery, humanity leaked through the cracks. Women whispered their real names to each other at night. They shared memories of rivers, songs, and festivals. They taught children forbidden languages in secret. Identity survived quietly, dangerously. The number 25,000 was impressive on a tablet. It meant success. It meant profit. But it also meant 25,000 individual lives redirected into silence. The war ended in weeks. The consequences lasted generations. Years passed. The empire moved on to new borders, new enemies, new victories. But the women remained, scattered across provinces like seeds forced into unfamiliar soil. Rome counted them as absorbed. History would count them as lost. Yet loss does not mean absence. One woman, once marked with a square on her arm, now worked on an estate near Capua. She was no longer 19. Her hair carried streaks of gray. Her back curved from years of labor. She had given birth twice. One child died young. The other survived, strong and observant. The boy belonged to the estate owner. She belonged to the kitchen. Their bond was unofficial, invisible, but real. She had learned Latin. Not the polished Latin of senators, but the sharp, functional Latin of commands and insults. Language was survival. With it, she negotiated lighter tasks, avoided beatings, and occasionally protected others. Power at the bottom was small but not meaningless. Across the empire, similar stories unfolded. Some women became indispensable. A skilled healer. A trusted wet nurse. A seamstress whose hands produced garments fit for elites. Rome allowed these women slightly longer leashes. Never freedom. But proximity to it. The system adapted as it always did. Laws were adjusted. Manumission, the freeing of slaves, existed but was rare and conditional. A woman might be freed after decades, only to find she had nowhere to go. Her homeland no longer existed. Her family was dead or scattered. Freedom, when it came, was often another form of exile. Roman writers rarely mentioned these women. When they did, it was in passing. A statistic. A moral example. A background figure in someone else's story. The empire recorded triumphs, not costs. But archaeology tells another tale. Grave markers with foreign names written in poor Latin. Household shrines blending Roman gods with older ones. DNA in modern populations tracing back to forced migrations. The women left traces Rome could not erase. The system that enslaved them weakened eventually, not because Rome grew kinder, but because it grew unstable. Civil wars disrupted supply lines. Economic pressures changed labor needs. Christianity reframed moral debates, slowly, inconsistently. The empire cracked from within. Yet the pattern survived Rome. Later empires copied it. Conquest followed by absorption. Violence followed by bureaucracy. Human lives converted into resources. When we speak of Rome today, we speak of roads, laws, architecture, order. We rarely speak of the women standing in silent lines after battle, waiting to be assigned a future they did not choose. 25,000 is a number that fits neatly in a title. But each unit of that number had a voice, a memory, a life interrupted. The hidden system was not hidden because it was secret. It was hidden because it was accepted. And acceptance is the most effective weapon any empire has ever used. The empire did not collapse all at once. It frayed. And within those fraying edges, the women who had once been absorbed into Rome's hidden system began to change in ways history rarely pauses to examine. By the time the legions withdrew from distant frontiers and generals turned their swords inward, the first generation of conquered women had aged into something Rome never planned for: memory. They remembered before. Before Roman law. Before ownership. Before being counted. And memory, even when silenced, has weight. In a crowded insula in Rome itself, an elderly woman woke before dawn every day. She was once part of the 25,000. No one around her knew that number anymore. To her neighbors, she was simply the woman who baked flatbread for extra coins, whose Latin carried an accent northwest one could place. Her back hurt constantly. Her hands shook when she poured water. But her mind remained sharp. At night, she told stories to children whose parents were too tired to listen. Stories of hills without roads. Of rivers without bridges. Of gods who did not speak Latin. The children listened. Rome never noticed. This was how resistance survived, not through open revolt, but through continuity. The system had been designed to break lineage. To scatter women so completely that no shared reminder could survive. But Rome underestimated something fundamental. Culture does not require permission. It requires breath. Across the empire, enslaved women formed quiet networks. In kitchens, laundries, fields, and workshops, they learned to identify one another through gesture, dialect, habit. A shared way of tying cloth. A particular melody hummed under breath. None of it was obvious. All of it was deliberate. Roman households depended on these women so deeply that control became paradoxical. Discipline was strict, but dependence softened its edge. A household could not function without them. Infants would starve. Food would spoil. Illness would spread. The women knew this. Power, however limited, grows in the shadows of necessity. Some used it to protect. Others to bargain. A few used it to disappear. Escape was rare, but not impossible. Rome's cities were crowded. Its borders long. Its bureaucracy immense. A woman freed through manumission might vanish into the population of another province. An enslaved woman might be sold, transferred, or inherited, moving farther from her point of origin with each transaction until she became untraceable. The system was efficient, but not flawless. Still, most did not escape. Most endured. And endurance reshapes people in ways victory never can. The children born into the system grew differently than Rome expected. They learned obedience, yes, but also observation. They watched how Romans argued, how they feared dishonor, how law could bend when reputation was at stake. Some learned to read. Some learned numbers. A few learned rhetoric by listening from corners of rooms they were not supposed to understand. Rome did not intend to educate them. But proximity is a teacher. By the second generation, the line between enslaved and free began to blur in subtle ways. Not legally. Never legally. But socially. Some enslaved women managed household finances. Others supervised labor. A trusted slave could wield more daily authority than a poor citizen. This contradiction gnawed at Rome's ideals. Writers noticed. Philosophers debated whether slavery corrupted the master more than the slave. Moral discomfort surfaced, then retreated. The empire needed labor. The empire needed order. Comfort was less important than stability. Yet stability was slipping. Civil wars broke out. Emperors rose and fell with alarming speed. Veterans demanded land. Taxes increased. Estates grew larger, more desperate for productivity. The pressure on enslaved populations intensified. Workloads increased. Punishments sharpened. Fear returned as policy. And fear has consequences. In Sicily, then in Italy, then beyond, uprisings erupted, not always led by women, but always supported by them. Food withheld. Tools misplaced. Messages passed. Rome crushed these revolts brutally, but each one revealed cracks. The hidden system required silence. Rebellion made noise. As Christianity spread, it did not immediately free anyone. But it reframed suffering. It introduced a moral language that unsettled ownership. Enslaved women attended gatherings at night. They heard words like soul, equality, witness. These ideas did not break chains, but they weakened justification. Masters noticed changes. Less certainty. More tension. Control required more effort than before. By the time the Western Empire faltered, the system that had once absorbed 25,000 women after a single conquest was no longer invisible. It was simply too large, too old, too strained. Laws shifted. Serfdom replaced outright slavery in some regions. Ownership softened into obligation. Not freedom, but transformation. The women did not vanish from history. They dissolved into it. Centuries later, people would walk Roman roads without knowing who built them or who paid the real cost. They would admire aqueducts without considering the hands that hauled stone. They would praise Roman order without naming the lives compressed beneath it. But traces remain. In language. In bloodlines. In customs passed down without explanation. In stories told by grandmothers who never learned where those stories came from. The hidden system succeeded in its immediate goal. It fed the empire. It stabilized conquest. It turned defeat into profit. But it failed in the only way systems ever truly fail: it could not erase humanity completely. 25,000 women entered Rome as numbers. They exited history as influence. Not celebrated. Not acknowledged. But present. And presence, once established, cannot be undone.